I don't know. So it's come to my attention that I made a grievous factual error earlier. There was this trivia question where I asked, what year did Albert Meyer's first student graduate in? Recall, oh, actually, let me just go back to that slide. It's important we get these details right. So I asked, Meyer graduated from PhD in Harvard in 1972. He became faculty at MIT in 1969. I asked, what year did Albert Meyer's first PhD student graduate? I thought it was Nancy Lintz in 1972, but I was wrong. He had a student in 1969, McCreight. Interestingly, so Meyer was, I guess, at Harvard for his PhD and then became faculty at MIT. And he had a student at Carnegie Mellon who graduated in 1969. So what candy would you like from the list?
As a non-American, I only know Hershey's.
Hershey's, okay, great. All right, and now that we've settled that, we can resume. Uh-oh.
Got back.
Okay, here, you can just pass it back. I think I won't. All right. So now we can get back to the hardness of MCSP. Okay, great. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about the progress we've made so far on proving MCSP is NP hard. I've told you a little bit about hardness based on cryptographic assumptions, and the point that I wanted to make with respect to that was that these cryptographic tools could be useful in proving NP hardness for MCSP, as we'll see later. Kind of the most recent results are making use of cryptographic ideas. And now I'm going to tell you about kind of two different approaches to get that work towards getting hardness for MCSP itself. And these are going to be results that are not quite for MCSP, but for problems that are seemingly very close to MCSP. And so the first approach that I want to tell you about is approaching MCSP from below. And kind of the logic behind this is the following intuition. So one reason that people think it's hard to prove NP hardness for MCSP is because we don't have good circuit lower bounds. So this is something that I told you earlier, and it's kind of the logic behind the limits for getting a deterministic reduction from SAT to MCSP. I actually, if you really ask me, I think this intuition may not be correct. And we'll see a little bit about that later. Some examples where it's not clear that this intuition is really capturing the difficulty of MCSP. But for now, you could take that as some intuition. That's something you could say. And in response to that, you might have the following idea. Okay, we can't prove hardness for MCSP because we don't have good circuit lower bounds. But what about restricted circuit classes where we do have good circuit lower bounds? Maybe we can prove the NP hardness of MCSP when you consider those circuit classes. So for example, constant depth circuits, maybe not all of you are familiar with the lower bounds literature, but there are various models of circuits for which we actually do have lower bounds. And this is the approach that I kind of call approaching MCSP from below, where you consider the problem, as I mentioned earlier, where the output is, does there exist a C circuit? And we'll see. So now I'm going to mention various circuit classes and what we know about that problem. So the first problem that I want to talk about is DNF MCSP. And so just as a reminder, DNFs are these objects where you take ands on the inside and then ors on the outside. They're kind of maybe the most basic model of computation that's complete, arguably, at least in the and or setting. And you can think of these as kind of like depth 2 circuits, where you're able to put 2 layers of gates on top of each other. And one way to...
You said, what did you say about? You said it's the only thing that's complete? What do you mean?
Oh, I said this is like the most basic model of and or circuits that is like complete in the sense it can compute any function.
You said it's the only one. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Of course, there are many. And just if you like geometry better than maybe logic, one way you can view this is you're computing a function by like covering the ones of that function by Boolean subcubes. And so this is like some sort of kind of almost like a set cover problem. And that intuition will come up in NP hardness of this problem. So back in 1979, Masick showed that the DNF version of MCSP is NP hard. His original proof was like a direct reduction from 3-sat, but or maybe not 3-sat, but like not it was really going through all the details. And one thing that I want to emphasize about this was mentioned by Rahul earlier, is that you may view this result as kind of counterintuitive. Because on the one hand, DNF MCSP seems like algorithmically an easier problem than MCSP. Because like DNFs, you know, seemingly they're, I mean, simple objects, they're just ores of Boolean subcubes, we can kind of understand them. And it might seem weird to you that, okay, if we know that DNF MCSP is NP hard, then of course the version of MCSP where you consider general circuits should be NP hard. But this intuition turns out like not, at least we don't know how to make it formal. And so it's somehow it seems like this is also an easier problem to show NP hardness for, probably because we can understand the no instances of DNF MCSP better than we can understand the no instances of regular MCSP. Okay, so back in 1979, Masick showed that this problem is NP hard. And there was a long line of work after that, both simplifying the proof and proving better hardness of approximation. And this kind of culminated by this theorem of Cote and Saquet that showed that DNF MCSP is NP hard to approximate to a logarithmic factor, which turns out to be tight, because this is, it turns out to be kind of basically a set cover problem. And for set cover, you have this greedy algorithm, which gets a log n approximation factor. DNF MCSP is basically completely understood. This is a problem that we know is NP hard. We know it's.
What is the size of the DNF? Is it the number of clauses?
Oh, good question. So you can, I think traditionally they use like the number of terms, is it? Yeah, they use like the number of I guess it's the number of ores here. But if you, you can get hardness for both measures. Pretty much any natural measure you can get. Oh yeah, Ian.
So considering, you know, it is counterintuitive that it's easier to show NP hardness for this, given that it does seem easier to solve. But if we can approximate up to a logarithmic factor, whereas we're kind of looking at MCSP gaps of like polynomial,
Yeah.
I guess, so does that first point still kind of hold that, you know, the bigger the circuit class you make, the more inapproximable we think it should be?
Yeah, I think that's true. So like DNF MCSP, Ian's question was related to the inapproximability of this problem. So for DNF MCSP, it's something that's approximable to a logarithmic factor. And the algorithm isn't hard. It's basically based on the greedy set cover algorithm. But for MCSP, if you believe in one-way functions, then this like really large order versus chaos gap is believed to be intractable. So that's an example of where enlarging the circuit class makes it harder to approximate.
Also now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and also I should have mentioned that when I said the one-way functions thing, but not only is it this order versus chaos problem hard in the worst case, but the lower bound based on one-way functions shows that's even hard to solve on average, because one-way functions are hard to break on average. So. Okay, cool. And I just want to mention, I won't talk about it in this talk, but this was extended to DNF with parity gates at the bottom by Shuichi, Igor, and Rahul. And so, okay, depth 2 circuits, we completely understand them. It's NP complete. We know the approximation algorithm. We know in approximability, everything's perfect. It's great. All right, depth 3 circuit MCSP.
Wait a minute, what about CNF?
Oh, CNF. So CNF circuit complexity and DNF circuit complexity, they're basically the same, because if you take the knot of a function, like if you can calculate the CNF complexity of an arbitrary truth table, you can calculate the DNF complexity of an arbitrary truth table by just taking the knot. So like DNF complexity of F is equal to the CNF.
No, the functions that require big CNF and small DNF and vice versa.
No, I'm saying if you take a function F and you look at its knot, like not F.
The function.
Then the CNF complexity of F is equal to the DNF complexity of not F. Maybe there's another knot. No, that sounds right. Yeah. And so like getting basically the complexity of DNF MCSP is the same as the complexity of CNF. Okay. Good question. Is there another question? Or? Yeah.
But we don't understand average case hardness for this.
That's a average case hardness.
Natural proof exists.
Yeah, I guess.
Generally,
Is useful against the.
Yeah, I guess over the uniform distribution, well, you can do this random restrictions check. Is that your question or yes?
I think it does, yeah.
Okay, awesome, thanks. All right, so depth 2, completely understood. So depth 3, circuit MCSP. If you're not familiar with what depth 3 circuits are, here's like a little picture. You got like AND gates and then OR gates and then AND gates again, or you could have OR gates at the bottom, OR gates at the top. You use 3 levels of ORs and ANDs. You're allowed unlimited fan in. And so let me tell you what we know about depth 3 MCSP. So it's an NP, and I think that's it. I thought a little bit. In fact, it's even open whether this problem is cryptographically hard. We do know that when you get to high enough depth, I think there's this paper by Eric and friends. I think Mike Sachs on the paper, Hellerstein, Tony's on the paper. There's a bunch of people on the paper that show that once this gets to a large enough constant, I think in the paper they remark maybe around 10, that this problem is cryptographically hard if you assume that like factoring is hard or something like that. But at depth 3, we don't know that it's cryptographically hard. We don't know if it's NP hard. We don't know if there's an approximation algorithm.
Property useful against the.
That's true. We do have an average case. Yeah, I should mention that. We do have an average case algorithm that works on the uniform distribution, natural property. You can check if this random restrictions technique works. But really, we don't understand the complexity of this. And so when I was saying earlier, there's this intuition that we can't prove hardness of MCSP because we don't have circuit lower bounds. I think this problem really presents a difficulty for that intuition, because depth 3 circuits, and if you ask people, they would say that maybe they understand it. I mean, I will say we don't have like strongly exponential lower bounds against depth 3 circuits. If you know what that means, great. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. But yeah, we really don't understand this version of MCSP. So this is kind of a mystery. I don't know. Maybe there could even be an approximation algorithm for this. It would be interesting. Any questions? Great. Okay, so now I've covered the full gamut here. We understand the depth 2 case. We don't understand depth 3 case. You might wonder if there's anything more for me to say in this approach from below. And actually, there kind of is. It turns out if you don't consider constant depth circuits, but instead you consider constant depth formulas, we understand the landscape a little bit better. So constant depth formulas, they're pretty similar to constant depth circuits, with the exception that gates can have fan out at most 1. And now you have constantly many levels in the circuit. All right. And so a few years ago, I was able to show that for any constant d, it turns out that the depth d formula MCSP problem is NP hard. And this is based, uses randomized Turing reduction. And so one thing that I want to point out about this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this is proved, but not too much. But this is another place where randomness shows up. And in fact, this is kind of one of the most interesting cases where randomness shows up, because the randomness used in this reduction isn't used to get a uniformly random function. You might think, when you're using your randomness, you're going to want to create some really hard function, maybe, so just pick one uniformly at random. It turns out in this reduction, you're not going to quite want to do that. There's something special that you want to do. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what that special thing is, but if you're interested, you can ask me later. But this is like a good demonstration of the power of randomness and how that's doing something interesting.
It's also possible how NP problems which provide fluid reduction.
Yeah. Oh, and I should also mention this is a quasi-polynomial time reduction. I should have put that in there. Yes. And it's not so common to have something that requires Turing reductions. It's unclear. I think Eric, you and RU student were like well, anyway, you guys were thinking a little bit about whether you could make this non-adaptive or something like that.
We looked at that a little bit, but we didn't get very far.
Yeah. So it's seems, at least so far, we don't know how to make this non-adaptive. But it's interesting that the depth 3 circuit case we still don't understand, but at least for constant depth formulas, we do understand that this problem is NP hard. And so let me tell you a little bit about how this is proved. And in fact, what I want to tell you about how this is proved actually comes back to a point I made earlier about kind of my personal motivation. There was a picture of me as a kid and the dog. where by studying MCSP, maybe we can get our hands on some new interesting ideas on how to prove circuit lower bounds. And to me, this is like a good proof of concept because we've got kind of new lower bound technique that I'll tell you a little bit about on the next slide. But basically, it's some technique that lets you take, if you have a depth of D lower bound for a function, you can come up with a new function f prime that will have a d plus 1 lower bound. And I'll tell you a little bit about that on the next slide. But the way that you use that in this reduction is by, to get some inductive approach, where you start with the NP hardness of DNF MCSP, and then you lift that to depth 3 formulas, and you lift that to depth 4 formulas, and you repeat. And one deficiency of this result, and where it could be improved, is its hardness of approximation isn't so great. It's like 1 plus epsilon factor, and that epsilon factor degrades with D. That's a potentially interesting question. Okay, any questions about this? On the next slide, I'm gonna take a detour to tell you a little about this lower bound and how it maybe exemplifies how looking at MCSP can lead us to new circuit lower bounds. Okay, great. So let me tell you about this lower bound result. And it's related to this question, like what is the cost of parallelization? If you're looking at serial computation where you're allowed to take a lot of time, take a lot of depth in order to make your computation versus where you want to do things in parallel. And I want to say, this is an old question with many lines of work. I don't want to go into them because this is just a tangent in this talk. But one definition you could make in order to formalize this question is you could say, let's look at L sub D of F, which is like the smallest size of any depth D formula computing F. So this is like the circuit complexity measure for depth D formulas. And then you could ask yourself, well, if I have a function F, the worst possible function F, how large could this quantity be? How far apart could the depth D complexity of F versus the depth D plus 1 complexity of F be additively? Yeah, of course, there's multiple ways you can formalize this. Maybe you care about multiplicative gaps, maybe you care about something, but one way you could do it is by caring about the additive. And so what do we know about this question, this problem? So there's this classical result based on the switching lemma that shows that there does exist a function for which you can get this gap, kind of this mildly exponential or weakly exponential, I think it was called earlier, where it turns out that it requires like 2 to the n to the 1 over D complexity over here, and get linear complexity at depth D plus 1. So there's this function. It's based on these things called the Sipser functions, where you have this really big gap. It's really easy to compute at depth D plus 1, but if you want to parallelize it and make it computable at depth D, you need to pay this exponential explosion. And you might ask, okay, can we do better over here? And I think, unfortunately, it's been a big open question of whether you can prove explicit lower bounds bigger than 2 to the n to the 1 over D. This is like one of the big questions in circuit complexity. And since we don't have lower bound techniques like that, and for a random function, it's actually not clear whether there should be a large gap here or not. I mean, some intuition is that, okay, let me not get into that. But using this lower bound technique that really just fell out of the MCSP result, like I wasn't trying to prove this or anything. It just, after the MCSP result, it just turned out that you could prove this. You can actually like get an exponential improvement here. Instead of this being 2 to the n to the 1 over D, this is going to be like 2 to the 0.001 n. So like some constant factor here. So you can get like an exponential improvement. And I think to me, this is like a good example of how studying the MCSP problem, leads kind of naturally to examining new lower bound technique. I think that's a good motivation. So this is like the example I wanted to give of that motivation. Any questions based on that?
Does this get to any implications for circular lower bounds?
I don't know. So I think the problem is that this function is like very non-explicit. It's like some mix between a random function and like parity. So
for him, it was parity with random restrictions fixed in or what?
This is a Sipser function. This is like that one over there. That's like this would be plus 1 read once.
Yeah, it's a D plus 1 read once formula. Over here, it's like some sort of mix between like something like the Sipser function and a random function in a specific way. It's like it's almost like this tree-like construction where you keep taking products of the function with random functions. Yeah, so far I haven't found an application for this. Seems like it might have.
The like standard denomination functions together. Well,
Yeah, so I think yeah, you need like non-deterministic circuit, like lower bound assumption or something.
But under that.
But under that, you would get an explicit function here.
So on the left, the gap is, more multiplicative, and on the right, it's additive, right? Or so.
Yeah, so I don't know how to, so here it's, it turns out for the specific function, this really is an additive gap. So that's something like over here, you have like linear versus exponential. Here you have, I mean, both these terms are going to look like this, but you can prove that there's this additive gap. I think it's interesting to study the multiplicative case as well. I don't know how to do it, but I mean, some ideas work, some ideas don't work. Maybe it's something that could be investigated. I don't want to get too distracted by this because the point of the talk is to teach you guys about MCSP. So I'm going to move on. And so the next model that I want to talk about is formula MCSP, where instead of considering circuits, we consider formulas. And so if you're not familiar with formulas, it's just circuits where each gate can only have fan out one. So you can't like reuse the output of a gate. And it's pretty related to parallel computation. And so formula MCSP, it turns out you can show that under the exponential time hypothesis, this problem is not going to be in P. And this is the point at which I want to return to this technique that I mentioned earlier, which is sub-exponential reductions, sub-exponential time reductions, and tell you a little bit about why they might be useful to show that formula MCSP and maybe MCSP itself is not in P under assumptions like ETH. And so here is the logic behind this. If you look at the number of formulas of size S, and you can calculate it, turns out the answer is going to be like roughly like 2 to the S log n. And most of that is coming from like labeling the leaves if you care about that, but whatever. So what does that mean? It means that if you're going to do the brute force algorithm, which is the best algorithm we know for this problem, that's going to take like 2 to the order S log n time. And that's bad if you're an algorithms person, but if you care about lower bounds, then that might be good, because that means that even when S is linear, when you're considering linear size formulas, the brute force algorithm, which is the best algorithm we know, doesn't even run in polynomial time. And so I want to stress here, there's this little n, which is like the number of variables to the function. Then there's this capital N, which is like the length of the truth table. So, and that's the input length. So like, even if you're trying to decide whether a function has linear size formulas, that's something that at least the brute force algorithm doesn't run in polynomial time. And so that suggests if you're like interested in fine-grained complexity, maybe you could possibly hope to show that formula MCSP is not in P by considering instances with linear size formulas. And those are things we know. We know formula lower bounds. We even know circuit lower bounds where we have a linear lower bound. And it turns out like you can actually make this logic work. Oh wait, did the logic make sense before I go on? Yeah.
You said, I'm confused because you said before the depth 3 formula is empty hard.
Yes.
So without any ETH.
Yeah, right. So this question is kind of in an analogy to the fact that we know DNF MCSP is NP hard, but we don't know whether for general circuits it's NP hard. So similarly, if you restrict the depth, we do know that formula complexity is NP hard if you restrict it to a constant depth. But if you don't have that restriction on the depth, it's under.
It doesn't imply that if it's NP hard for depth 3, it doesn't imply that in general it's NP hard.
Yeah. It's it definitely is something that's kind of weird from an intuitive standpoint, but I get the problem is like the no instances of the constant depth formula reduction might not be no instances for general formulas.
So formally, these statements are incomparable as far as we know.
As far as we know, yeah. So so there's this logic. Basically, the takeaway is that the brute force algorithm runs in super polynomial time, even on these small size instances that we potentially understand. And because of that, you could hope to prove using fine-grained assumptions that formula MCSP is not in P. And in fact, the reduction actually works from this problem, which sounds kind of nasty, but it's kind of nice. 2n by 2n bipartite permutation independent set. It was first considered by people in parameterized complexity, and they were able to show that it requires like 2 to the n log n time, which, you look over here, that's 2 to the n log n, that's 2 to the n log n, and kind of, I'll just give you one idea from this because I don't want to spend too much time on this, but one of the ideas is somehow the OR function, if you look at its optimal circuits, there's many optimal circuits for the OR function, because you have to OR together each one of the bits, but you can do it in any order you want. So there's like n factorial, which equals 2 to the n log n roughly optimal formulas. That also looks like this. And so somehow you're able to create some hardness where picking the correct optimal formula for the OR function, you're able to create some problem based on that. So that kind of gives you some intuition for this. And I think this is like a good example of like, so proving hardness for this problems, we don't necessarily need like really exotic lower bounds. We could get away with potentially easy lower bounds. We just need the right ones. And to use them the right way. And then the last thing I want to mention about this is that you also get a polynomial time search decision reduction. This question of whether you can get a search decision reduction for MCSP has been open for a while, but using ideas based on this, you can actually get a polynomial time search decision reduction. Naively, you get like a sub-exponential one, but you can actually get a polynomial one. But I don't want to talk about the techniques for that too much, unless someone's interested. Okay, cool. And so one open question, and I'll mention this at the end, is like this, all this logic applies to MCSP. So can you use this to show MCSP is not NP under ETH? You know, there's, as far as I know, there's no barriers to doing this, but I'll come back to this later when I talk about open questions. Oh, and look at that. So I think there's two main open questions. One is the depth, the NP hardness of depth 3 circuit MCSP. Again, we don't know anything about this, so I guess I really should say or approximation algorithm or cryptographic hardness. Anything about depth 3 circuit MCSP would be interesting. One thing that we do know is that depth 3 formula MCSP is NP hard, and formula complexity and circuit complexity at depth 3 are actually really close to each other. There's really not that much space to reuse gates if you think about it. So they're only a factor of n away from each other. They seem really close. So the fact that we know that depth 3 formula is MCSP is NP hard seems like we should know depth 3 circuit MCSP is NP hard, but we don't know. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that this question is open kind of undermines this intuition that the missing piece is circuit lower bounds. And then the second open question I want to mention in terms of approaching MCSP below is, can you show that MCSP is not NP under ETH? There's seemingly no barrier to showing this. It seems like it just needs like one new idea, maybe not even an interesting idea. Like, just seems to require one new idea, I think. All right, so that concludes what I'm talking about in the approach from below. Now I'm going to talk about a different way to get towards hardness of MCSP, which is approaching things. Oh, sorry, Alex.
Is there any interesting circuit class that where we know that MCSP for that circuit class is not NP hard?
Very interesting. Okay, yeah, that's a good question.
What do you mean by we know it's not NP hard?
I
guess, or okay, sure, that might be difficult to say, but I guess maybe where there's like a non-trivial algorithm that makes it unlikely to be NP hard.
I think the tricky part about this is like kind of almost any interesting circuit class, at least when you get past the constant depth side, is going to be able to implement cryptography. And then once you can implement cryptography, then you're not going to be able to get an algorithm for it, because it's like a similar logic to earlier in the slides. Like if you can solve the problem, you can break one-way functions computable in that model.
One example is like computing the minimum depth of a decision tree. That could be done in time polynomial on the truth table, for example.
Let me just repeat the question or repeat the answer in case anybody didn't hear it. But Ryan pointed out that if you consider the model, the decision tree model, which is like, and the version of the minimum circuit size problem for decision trees, you can actually solve that in polynomial time. So you can find the size of the smallest depth of any decision tree in polynomial time.
Or maybe a less interesting example, but one that's relevant. If you look at circuits with QBF oracle gates, so that's provably not hard even for P under AC0 M reductions.
Yeah, so Eric is saying, what if you consider these circuit classes where you allow QBF work? Yeah, okay. All right. So now let me talk about this approach from above, which takes a different tack at trying to get towards MCSP. And so what do we mean by approaching MCSP from above? It means showing problems that we know are harder than MCSP, or in other words, generalizations of MCSP are NP hard. And so that sounds a little bit abstract. So let me give you some examples. So the original definition of MCSP looks like this. But you could imagine, instead of putting a total function here, you could allow partial functions. Or instead of requiring a function with one bit of output, you could allow multiple bits of output. And then ask, OK, can we show that this problem is NP hard? And proving NP hardness for these problems, for these generalizations of MCSP, are logically necessary for showing MCSP is NP hard. So it's very natural to try and attack them. OK, so let me go to our first example, which is conditional MCSP. So this is some conditional version of MCSP. And its input is mostly the same. It still takes in the truth table Boolean function. It still takes in a size threshold, but now it's going to take in a second truth table. It's going to be the truth table of some oracle Boolean function. I'll call O from m bits to 0, 1 bits. And now the question is going to be, does there exist a circuit with O oracle gates and let's say S wires computing F? So if you think about this in like some sort of like conditional version of MCSP, where now there's going to be multiple truth tables, and you ask, relative to some other truth table, is this thing hard? And I think what's interesting about this result, and the reason why I put it up, is it has this kind of dichotomy where on the one hand, if you consider deterministic reductions, showing this problem as NP hard under deterministic reductions requires separating X from ZPP, which we don't know how to do. But on the other hand, you can actually show that under randomized reductions, this problem is NP hard. And in fact, this proof is actually not too hard to show. So it gives a good example where randomness is like provably useful in terms of proving the NP hardness of MCSP. And I should say there are some great extensions of this work to the Kolmogorov setting. I don't want to, as I said at the beginning of the talk, I didn't really want to talk too much about the Kolmogorov setting to limit the amount of definitions I have to give, but these results are really interesting in that they give examples of NP complete problems whose average case complexity characterizes one-way functions, but maybe we'll hear about them more tomorrow. And the last thing I want to mention is that there's this result by Hirohara at this year's CCC, which gives at least much stronger inapproximability for this problem. So like one kind of theme in metacomplexity is that of the hardness results that we're able to prove, we're not able to get very good approximation, hardness of approximation for these problems. So I think Hirohara's result is one of the first that gets like good hardness of approximation. I think it's like n to the 1 over log n, but it's still much better than before where we only had like logarithmic factor hardness. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about conditional MCS. Oh, yes, Marco.
Can you say something quantitative about n in these reductions? So it's like giving an extra string 2 to the n bits for free to the circuit succinctly.
Yeah.
Is, if you made that empty, you would get everything.
You get everything.
So
right now it has to be, I think you can get like any polynomial relationship with n that you want with sufficient padding and stuff like that. Yeah, you can get that. I don't know how to do lower than that. But it's a good question. I mean, in some sense, you can interpret Hirohara's result, most recent result, as showing you can show if you set things up correctly, you can set m equal to like log n, which is crazy. Log little n, or sorry, no, log capital N, if you interpret it in the right way. But okay, cool. Let's see. I think I'm gonna skip this proof idea. It's not very hard, but it turns out that, and some of the ideas show up a little bit in later on, but I think I may skip this. Okay, and so the next variant of MCSP that I wanted to talk about is the multi-output variant of MCSP. Now, instead of talking about a single output function, you talk about a function with multiple outputs. Instead of just 1 bit, you get potentially m bits. And your output is now going to be, does there exist a multi-output function of size at most s computing f? And it turns out here, together with Igor, who's here, and Bruno, who is not here right now, we're able to show that this problem is NP hard under randomized Turing reductions. And again, it's an example of where you can use randomized reductions. Somehow the key idea is related to almost similar like symmetry of information, which I didn't think we would see today, but we ended up seeing, which was nice. But there's this chain rule in information theory where you have, if you look at the entropy of two joint random variables, it's related to the conditional entropy. And kind of our reduction works like this, where it starts with this conditional version, and it's able to show that the multi-output version is hard by using a relation. But I also don't want to concentrate too much on this result. So that's kind of what I was gonna say. But one thing that I do want to emphasize is that this does require a lot of output. So M here is polynomially related to capital N. So the question of squishing that down to like less and less outputs is another way to approach MCSP, and is something we don't really understand. All right.
And the number of outputs is like exponential in the number of inputs?
Yeah, number of outputs is exponential in the number of inputs. All right, any other questions?
What's the size?
The size threshold is going to be like, I guess, polynomial in the length of the thing. Like, the reduction is also based on set cover, like the previous one. All right, and that brings us to second trivia break. All right, there are lots of great prizes left here. So the first trivia is about Leonid Levin, and the question is, Levin's discovery of the theory of NP completeness was in part motivated by a dispute with his blank, who was skeptical on the usefulness of theory. Sure, definitely something. So answer A, advisor. Answer B, roommate. Answer C. So who thinks the answer is A? All right, Greg.
My reasoning is that it occurred to me, you never told us we weren't allowed to answer for all of the options.
Oh.
So I figured that's the optimal strategy.
All right, who thinks the answer is B? All right, let me see. Okay, Eric.
I don't think it was the mother.
And who thinks the answer is C, mother? All right, Abhishek.
I don't know.
It's the most interesting answer.
Matters are the most important.
Conveys the most information.
So the answer is B, roommate. So the precise quote here was, this is coming from Levin's blog. Later, I got into dispute with Yuri Albertin, my roommate in our undergraduate dorm. He was skeptical on the usefulness of theory and gave combinatorial optimization methods as examples of real issues. I argued these algorithms are just heuristics, and some combinatorial problems like tiling was one of the first problems he showed was NP complete, are very likely solvable. He dismissed tiling as a toy problem, but I said one can try to show this for other problems by reducing tiling to them. I proceeded developing several such reductions. Komogorov, his advisor, found this very interesting and wanted me to publish it. I, however, viewed these problems as of narrow interest. All right, so what candy, what would you want for your prize?
Reese's, please.
Reese's. Right. I've resorted to passing this back as a safer method. All right, Reese's are off. Both Reese's are off the table. I got two of them because I thought they would be popular. So in this next trivia segment, I will ask questions, and you will need to answer which Rahul is this referring to. The other Rahul does not get to answer, or maybe he does. So the first question is, who played baseball on a university team? Is it A, Rahul, or B, Rahul? All right, I'll let you think about this for a second. Who thinks the answer is A, Rahul? Oh, okay. I guess when I call, I guess all of you should raise your hands, really. Like, but when I call on you, you have to specify which Rahul. Okay. Okay. What do you think, Tom?
Him,
Rahul Santanam. Okay.
because MIT doesn't have a team.
Anybody want to take the counter side of that?
You, because Rutgers has a team.
Ooh, really? Because Rutgers has a team. So I gotta say, this one's a bit of a trick question. Rahul Santanam, I believe, was the captain of his intramural baseball team in graduate school, right?
Yeah, so softball.
Softball. Oh, I see. Okay. And you guys were not the opposite of undefeated, right?
Yeah, we were.
Okay, so Tal, what prize would you like?
Yeah, you don't have non-mint Kit Kat by any chance.
I do not have non-mint Kit Kat.
I'll take Starburst.
Starburst. Okay, great. There you go. Enjoy your prize. I thought they were going to be really popular. I thought they would rival the Reese's Pieces. Okay, and then the second and last question is, who said MCSP is more fundamental than SAT? Was it A, Rahul, or B, Rahul?
Well, at this point, both of you.
All right, what do you think?
Yeah.
No, I think it's me. All right. Anybody think it's the other Rahul?
It's this guy.
It's oh, Marco, what do you think?
I think it's also other Rahul. I think all the answers are, there's no wrong answer to this question.
Everybody wins.
Everybody wins. So yeah, okay. I'm gonna give out 2 pieces of candy for this one. So what would you like, Marco?
I would like the mint Kit Kat.
Oh, you would like the mint Kit Kat? And what would you like?
The other mint Kit Kat.
Oh, okay. Well, those went fast. Here, you want to pass these back? So this quote, I guess you got an argument with Lance Fortnow or something like this about whether MCSP is more fundamental than SAT. I think Lance's opinion was it was ridiculous or something like that. And then so I was visiting the other Rahul and he was telling me about this and I was like, can I quote you on that? And he was very generously said yes. So and then for many years I started all my talks by saying MCSP is more fundamental than SAT, quote Rahul. And then I had to turn the slide and I'd be like Rahul Santanam question mark. So this is technically this is said by the other Rahul. I don't
By you as well.
yeah, by me as well.
More times than it's
I'm still being convinced, but yeah. Okay, so that's the end of our trivia segment. I guess we do have extra candy, so if anybody asks any really good questions, you may be and get some Fun Dip and Milk Duds. Okay, cool. So now we get to our big problem, partial function MCSP. This is where some really substantial progress has been made very recently. So what is partial function MCSP? It's where your input is going to be the truth table of now a partial function, some function from 0, 1, n to 0, 1 star. And I want to stress here, you're still given this full truth table. It's not like you don't have to describe the things in the stars or something, and you can make it exponentially more succinct. You still have to specify this whole 2 to the n length truth table. It's just that there are some inputs where you kind of like don't care about the output. If you like, you can think of these stars as question marks instead. And then you can ask, does there exist a circuit of size at most s computing f on all the 0, 1 values? Any questions about the definition of this? Okay, cool. And I want to stress that this, at least historically, has been a very important intermediate problem. So for the DNF MCSP NP hardness result, the modern version of that proof actually starts by showing this problem is NP hard and then reducing this problem to the total function version, as well as the result that formula MCSP is not in P under ETH. That also goes through the partial function version. So historically, this has been an intermediate problem and kind of an important stepping stone to hardness of MCSP.
You don't mean NP intermediate when you say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like,
In English.
yeah, in English, exactly. Yeah, I guess this is ambiguous. So under deterministic reductions, we knew that this problem was not in P under ETH, kind of using the same techniques as the formula result, but and that was using like sub-exponential reductions. But I think what's been really amazing is in the past year, Shuichi has shown that this is NP hard under randomized reductions. And I just want to say, I really did not think that this was going to be possible anytime soon. It's really an amazing result. I'm like really happy I've seen it, and I think you guys should definitely, I'm going to cover a little bit about it, but like you guys should definitely go and read this paper because it's really amazing. And one thing that I want to emphasize about this hardness result versus almost all the other previous hardness results that we've seen is that a lot of the previous hardness results were kind of model dependent in that, like, okay, they show constant depth formulas as NP hard, but that's it. Like they showed that model's NP hard, certain versions of MCSP NP hard. And this argument is very general. It works for like MCSP star and a whole slew of related problems. And this really seems like the right way to attack the problem. And the way that this is proved, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but not too much, is again, it's going to use randomized reductions. But I think the key new innovation in this proof are the cryptographic tools that it uses. The proof really has these cryptographic ideas in it, and it seems like this is going to be an important part in showing MCSP itself as NP hard. And so let me tell you a little bit about those cryptographic tools. So we have these cryptographic tools. One of them is secret sharing. How many people in this audience are familiar with secret sharing? All right. Yeah, I'm going to tell you what secret sharing is, but it's this beautiful, in this case, we're interested in the information theoretic notion, which I think came first. It's this beautiful idea from cryptography about how if you want to have a secret and you want to split it amongst certain parties, what ways you can do that so that all the parties have to get together to reconstruct your secret. I'll explain in more detail later, but this is a very interesting cryptographic tool. And the other thing is an information theoretic encryption scheme against small programs. And it turns out, like, this sounds very complicated, but if you're a cryptographer, for example, like Goldreich-Levin works to do this if you interpret it in the right way. And so these are two cryptographic ideas, which are kind of like the main tools used to prove, or well, two of the main tools, I would say, used to prove this result. So let me tell you a little bit about that. But before that, I want to make a comment. At the beginning of this talk, I told you about this dream where it's like P not equal to NP implies MCSP is hard in the worst case, implies average case, blah, 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 implies one-way functions of this. And this is something that, thanks to Lewin Pask, we've known about for a few years, and I think people have been thinking about, and people were thinking we can use MCSP and the NP hardness of MCSP to answer questions in cryptography. And I think what's really interesting about this is that actually the two areas might be even more intertwined than we thought, in that NP hardness of MCSP actually might be using cryptographic techniques. And maybe like this idea NP hardness and the existence of one-way functions, or at least idea things in cryptography, maybe they're more connected than we thought. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, so in the remaining few minutes, I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about how this reduction works. And the first thing I'm going to tell you about is the problem that Hirhara is reducing from. It's not so important that you understand this problem. I just want to give you some flavor of it. But it's given some monotone formula phi, you want to estimate the minimum number of ones of any satisfying assignment to phi. And so this problem was proved NP hard, and then there's some work that shows that it's hard to approximate. But for now, all you need to know is that this problem is NP hard. And it sounds like an NP hard problem. It seems believable that it would be NP hard. And the second key ingredient that I want to focus on that I mentioned already is secret sharing for monotone formula phi. So this is kind of a classic result in secret sharing. Secret sharing in this sense means that there's some algorithm share and there's some algorithm reconstruct that are randomized. And when you run share on a formula phi and a bit b, it's going to output these strings S1 up to Sn, which are called secret shares. And these things are meant so that you can hand them to parties 1 up to n, you hand each one of them your secret shares. And the point is that if you look at any adversary that gets to see all the set of shares in a set T, the way that this algorithm is set up is if phi evaluates to 1 on those people, so you can interpret the set as an assignment where you have like 0 going to people who to items that are R and T and 1 going to things that are R and T. If phi evaluates to 1 on this indicator, you're able to reconstruct what the bit B is. Otherwise, if you don't have access to a set of shares for which the formula phi is satisfiable, then B is information theoretically hidden. So again, if you don't fully understand this, I wouldn't worry about it so much. It's just some tool from cryptography that hopefully I've reminded you of. If not, don't worry about it too much. Are there any like pressing questions about this though? Oh, do you have a question? Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering if it matters at all what secret sharing scheme you use.
I think in the proof it doesn't matter. Besides, like you need some like efficiency parameters and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't think it matters so much. There is a very simple scheme to do this though.
Yeah.
And so if you combine these two things together, it says that like if you're given some formula phi, there's some way of constructing, picking a random bit b and generating shares such that determining the minimum number of shares needed to reconstruct b is hard. Because here you can reconstruct b if b is something is a satisfying assignment, and here it's saying like the minimum number of ones in any satisfying assignment. And so here's how the reduction works. I'm going to tell you how the reduction works, and I probably will skip correctness or some intuition. So I'm going to say we have as a second tool some sort of encryption scheme. It doesn't really matter for the intuition. I'm going to give what this encryption scheme does. It's just something that has a secret key, and given a message M, it spits out the ciphertext. And it has a decryption algorithm as well. And what the reduction looks like is as follows. Oh, I should say, I'm not going to tell you the actual reduction. I'm going to tell you a really, really terrible reduction. In fact, it's going to be so inefficient, it's going to be worse than the brute force algorithm, but it's going to involve some of the ideas of the original proof, and that's what I wanted to convey here. And so it's given phi, what are you going to do? You're going to pick some random secret keys. There might be a security parameter associated with, don't worry about that now for intuition. And you're going to construct a partial truth table as follows. You're going to first set all the values in the truth table to star or question mark. And then after that, you're going to fill in the non-stars by repeating the process, the following process many times. You'll pick a B uniformly at random. Then you'll let S1 up to Sn be your secret shares. Then you're going to let X be your an encryption of the first secret share with the first secret key, and then up to the concatenation of that with the last secret share according to the last secret key. And I want to point out that because you're going to repeat this for like all possible choices of randomness here, because the secret sharing algorithm has randomness, encryption has randomness, bit B has randomness, and that's why this is going to have enormous size. But let's not worry about efficiency for now. You could construct this truth table, and this is, giving you some ideas, some of the main ideas in this reduction. And okay, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about why you might have correctness in the yes case. In the yes case, if there's a small set of authorized shares, if phi has a small satisfying assignment, which means that there's like a small set of shares you need to reconstruct, you can create a small circuit by just memorizing the secret keys corresponding to that small set of authorized shares. And then when you're given an input of the form X, you'll decrypt it to find this corresponding secret shares and then reconstruct to find the bit B. So the idea here is if there's a small number of shares, somehow you need to only know a few of the secret keys here. And so this is set up so that the circuit has size like maybe something like the size of the authorized set times lambda. And then in the no case, where there's no small set of authorized shares, roughly the intuition will work like this. Any circuit that's able to compute B must look at many secret shares by the security of the secret sharing scheme. And then by the security of the encryption scheme, it needs to know that many secret keys. And so the circuit needs to have like many secret keys hardwired in. So this must be large. So, if you followed that, great. If not, that's okay. I think we should, hopefully my goal here is just to get you interested in this paper and hopefully take a look at it. Ian?
Where's the partialist come into the, I mean,
Oh,
I
yeah,
guess you're not
great
filling
question.
out the whole table, but how much of it are you filling out?
Yeah, so you'll only end up filling out, I think, like a polynomially small fraction. So the point is that these encryptions, not everything is going to be a valid encryption. Not everything is going to be a valid secret share. So because of that, there's going to be some inputs here X, which are not corresponding to encryptions and not corresponding to secret shares, and that's where these question marks are coming from. Other questions? Oh, also, this is like the last slide, or basically the last slide I wanted to cover. Sorry. have questions.
So if one had used like these worst trivial secret sharing schemes from earlier works, would you still have gotten something for MCSP just with more stars or?
So I believe, okay, from when I talked to Shuichi and he was explaining to me, the secret sharing scheme that he's using is like, I'm imagining it probably is one of what you're talking about with the trivial secret sharing scheme, where it's like, if there's an OR gate on top, you hand the bit to both parties. Then if there's an AND gate, you do like some parity thing trick.
Oh, I thought you used like a more advanced one, but no, so you use the same as.
I believe so. At least that's when I was meeting with them.
This is the most efficient steam node from formulas.
Can you just stay here for 30 seconds?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Can you say a little bit about why you use encryption and decryption?
Yeah, so the encryption and decryption, that's so like you're bound on the circuit size here. Here is somehow related to the fact that unless you decrypt enough of these guys, you're not going to know the bit B. And in order to decrypt enough of those guys, you have to pay for their secret keys. So the encryption and decryption thing is the goal of that is to make any circuit that's successfully able to compute this function have to know a certain amount of secret keys. Basically, a number of secret keys proportional to the number of ones needed to evaluate, or sorry, the minimum monotone satisfying size. Does that make sense?
So if it's like if the shares are out there it's plain text and
yeah, if the shares were out there in plain text, then you could imagine there's a circuit for getting B, which just runs the reconstruction algorithm on all the shares, and that's going to be a small circuit. But if you encrypt the shares, then you have, in order to decrypt enough of the secret shares in order to get the bit B, you have to pay for each one of the secret keys. If yeah. So you'll have to pay for like however many shares you want to get times lambda. Of course, I'm giving you some intuition that like maybe there's something smarter that you can do than just memorize the secret key, but if you set things up right, you get a bound like that. Any other questions about this? Okay, so then let me leave you with this open question, NP hardness for MCSP. Can you extend your HAR from partial MCSP to MCSP? We have partial total reductions in other contexts. There is this Oracle independent reductions barrier. It seems like his result is Oracle independent. So you maybe have to get around that, but I don't know. Like it seems really close to settling the MCSP problem. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Yeah.
I guess I'm just on this question of like, when is it that the S instances are small circuits and no instances are like overall complexity? So is that the case for all the reductions from above, where you go down from above?
Oh, I see. So you're not just asking about Shuichi's result. You're asking
Shuichi's result.
Okay. So you're asking yes instances are small circuits and the no instances have large Kolmogorov complexity. That's going to be true for, and you're asking for the approach from above, right?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a distinction between approach from above and approach from below. It's a circuit from above.
Yeah, I think that. Okay, I'd have to think about it, but my initial answer is like I think all of them might be circuit complexity low and then Kolmogorov. Okay, I have to think about it, but that's my initial guess. I yeah.
That's also related, I think, all the different.
Yeah, it seems related to work methods.
But am I right in that I understand it's a very sketchy sketch, but in that sketchy sketch, there was only one cell in the table that was actually not star. It was
No, actually, yeah, let me go back to that. So there are going to be many, it depends like what encryption scheme you use and what secret sharing scheme you use.
The way you had it is like you do one secret sharing, here are my shares, and then you did.
Oh, okay. So you're going to repeat this process with many different bits of randomness for the secret share, and you're going to repeat this process with many bits of basically go over all possible randomness for the encryption. So your remaining star values are going to correspond to things that aren't encryptions and like aren't,
So it was very not sparse in the end because you did every possible secret share stuff.
Oh, okay, you're talking about the sparsity of the non-stars, right? Okay, yeah. So it ends up being like a 1 over polynomial.
And when do you stop? You just do all possible.
Yeah, you do all possible. That's why this reduction is inefficient. Actually, I mean, a good exercise, I think, or a fun exercise is to try and think about like how you would possibly, like what ideas would you need to make this efficient? And I think that's what's really amazing about Shuichi's results is not only was he able to put together secret sharing and encryption in this way, the techniques you need to get an inefficient reduction. And in fact, this shows that some other problems related to metacomplexity is NP hard, but he's able to go from that and then take this and make this efficient enough to work in the MCSP, partial MCSP setting. Perhaps clever. But I don't want to spoil it for you, but you should definitely read the paper. Yeah.
Do you have any intuition like when is it possible to get partial to total reduction for various kinds of MCSP?
Yeah, so as far as I know, there are only 2 examples. One is for DNF MCSP and the other is for formula MCSP. For DNF MCSP, you really need to understand how DNFs work. That seems like very specific. You need a specific lower bound there. For formula MCSP, there's this one trick based that Buchführer and Riemanns invented called formula leaf weighting. And based on that, you can do something. But even that's like an exponential, exponential in the size parameter you want.
So it's only polynomial.
Yes, and then the exponential, precise exponential matters because you want to be less than this like 2 to the n log n that I mentioned earlier.
Otherwise you have formula MCSP.
Yeah. Yes, because of the Shuichi.
So currently the partial to total reductions are quite ad hoc.
Yeah, I would say the partial total reductions are quite ad hoc. But yeah, who knows? I will say, I'll comment on this. So for the formula MCSP result, originally I showed that partial MCSP is not in P under ETH, and I was like, I don't think that you can do a partial to total reduction for formulas. Then it ended up being you could do a partial to total reduction for formulas. So I'm cautious. I also think you can't do a partial to total reduction for circuits, but I thought that about formulas, and it turned out you could do it for formulas. So no trust me. Any other questions? Oh, yes, Ian.
When you strip aside the specifics of the machinery, like what's the big difference between the Shirahara approach and all the results that you had in terms of, say, how it uses randomness? Is it like you just blatantly use the randomness, whereas he uses secret keys, or is it deeper than like in a parsimonious way?
So if you're familiar with the Oracle MCSP result, I know I skipped over the proof, but you could, if you glance at this in the right way, the encryptions here are Oracle accesses there, and the secret sharing there is kind of like a trivial secret sharing scheme, where it's just like you secret share something between 3 parties where any one of them can recover the secret share. So you just tell each one of them the answers. It's like a really simple secret sharing scheme. So there is some sense in which you can interpret that result in this context, or this is a generalization of that.
But then what is it about the generalization that gets these, that goes from ETH all the way back to the hardness? Is it that it uses less randomness?
Oh, okay. So that Oracle MCSP result, that's not NP, that's not ETH, that's NP hardness.
Oh, okay.
And let me tell you, like the generalization of that to the idea to use secret sharing and encryption, that's like a huge jump, like already, like but yeah, how you make this inefficient to efficient requires new ideas. So like, okay, I guess I'll spoil some of it. You have to use the PCP theorem and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Let's say in approximately and all of that is a big part.
Yeah, it's a big part of it. And I don't talk about it. And I guess maybe I think we should end now, but one thing that Shuichi mentioned to me when I was talking to him is that he actually wasn't aiming to show that this problem was NP hard. I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know if he thought that it would be possible to show his NP hard or what his thought process was, but what he told me was he was aiming for min LT and then he like followed the rabbit hole and he got to this. So.